My story isn't your typical family drama. It's a tale of survival, manipulation, and finally finding the courage to set boundaries. I 23F am going to tell you how I survived years of emotional and financial exploitation by my own family. It all started when I was 5 years old. That was the year I lost my dad, Michael. He was this incredible guy, kind, hardworking, and the absolute definition of integrity. My memories of him are fragmented now, like an old photograph slowly fading at the edges. But the impact he had on my life? That remained crystal clear. My mom, Linda, 52F, didn't waste much time moving on. Within a year, she had remarried to Robert, 55M, a man who wasn't terrible but never quite filled the void my father left. A year after their marriage, my half-sister Olivia, 20F, was born. From the very beginning, something felt different in our family dynamic. As I grew older, the subtle manipulations began. My mom developed this habit of constantly reminding me how everything we had came from Robert. Without him, we'd have nothing, she would say, her eyes drilling into me with a mix of guilt and warning. What she didn't know was that I had a secret, a lifeline my grandfather had quietly prepared for me. When I turned 18, my grandfather, my dad's father, transferred the house deed to my name. It was his final gift, a piece of security he wanted me to have. I remember the evening he told me, his weathered hands holding mine, telling me to always protect myself. Little did I know how prophetic those words would become. My teenage years were a constant hustle. While other kids were hanging out, going to parties, or worrying about their social media status, I was working multiple jobs, chasing scholarships, and trying to build a future for myself. My mom made it crystal clear that I owed everything to her and Robert. Every opportunity, every penny I earned was somehow framed as a debt I needed to repay. When Robert and Linda divorced during my sophomore year of high school, things got even more complicated. My mom stopped working entirely, living off alimony and constantly reminding me of how much I owed her. "I sacrificed everything for you," she would say, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and desperation. I knew the truth, though. My grandfather had been quietly watching out for me. When I turned 18, he pulled me aside and told me about the house, the very house we were living in. "This was your father's family home," he whispered, sliding the deed across the kitchen table. "It's yours now, Tracy. Always remember that you have something that's truly yours." College was my lifeline. I earned a full scholarship, worked part-time, and maintained a near-perfect GPA. Meanwhile, my sister Olivia saw education completely differently. To her, college was just an inconvenience, something to be tolerated between shopping trips and social media posts. When Olivia graduated high school, my mom approached me with her signature manipulative tone. "You can afford to help her now," she said, making it sound like I had some moral obligation. And like the dutiful daughter I had been trained to be, I agreed to pay for her college tuition. A public college, mind you, despite Olivia's dreams of some fancy private school with a price tag that would make most people's jaws drop. My freelance creative career was my salvation. I built my professional network from scratch, working long hours to establish myself in a competitive industry. Every project was a battle, every client a potential lifeline. While my peers were chasing trends, I was chasing stability, something I'd never had in my family life. Then came the Tuesday that would change everything. I was at my mom's house, technically my house, though I never brought that up, for our usual family dinner. I had barely stepped through the door when Olivia burst in, practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. Oh my God," she kept squealing, dancing around the living room like a child on Christmas morning. I tried to get her attention, wondering what could possibly be so earth-shattering. Finally, she calmed down enough to blurt out the news. "Jake proposed. I'm getting married." Jake was our neighbor, a guy I'd known for years. He seemed decent enough. My heart did this weird little twist. I had recently gone through a painful breakup after catching my own boyfriend cheating, so wedding news wasn't exactly what I wanted to hear. But I plastered on what I hoped was a supportive smile. "Congratulations," I said, trying to sound genuine. "But aren't you still in the middle of college?" Olivia waved her hand dismissively. "Who cares about college? This is way more important." My mom jumped in immediately. Oh honey, this is wonderful news. We need to start planning immediately. Should we book the country club or that new venue downtown? I sat there, watching them bounce increasingly elaborate and expensive ideas back and forth. The familiar feeling of being the only adult in the room started creeping in. 200 guests. White doves. An ice sculpture. It was becoming clear this wasn't going to be a simple wedding, this was going to be a full-blown production. As I drove back to my apartment that night, an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. Something told me this was just the beginning of a much bigger problem. A week passed after Olivia's big announcement, and I started to think maybe I'd been paranoid. When I arrived, Olivia was already there, practically vibrating with excitement. She had this massive binder filled with magazine cutouts and what looked like a novel's worth of wedding notes. Before I could even sit down, she launched into her grand vision. I've planned everything out perfectly, she gushed, flipping through pages of what were clearly very expensive ideas. The venue she wanted had an amazing garden with a fountain, and they would do this thing where they release hundreds of white doves right after the ceremony. I tried to keep my face neutral, but my stomach was already doing flips. That sounds expensive, I said carefully. Oh, about that, Olivia pulled out a piece of paper covered in numbers. When she handed me that paper, I swear my heart stopped for a second. The numbers I was looking at weren't just expensive. They were insane. The venue alone cost more than my annual rent. Then there were the doves, a live band, not just any band, but some supposedly famous one, ice sculptures, a designer dress, premium open bar, gourmet catering. Are you joking? I couldn't help asking, my voice coming out higher than usual. Olivia snatched the paper back, scanning it like she was checking her math. No, why would I be joking? Everything's perfectly reasonable. Perfectly reasonable? I choked out. Olivia, this is more than what some people spend on a house down payment. That's when the waterworks started. Olivia's face crumpled, and she burst into tears. You're just jealous because your boyfriend cheated on you and now you're alone, she sobbed. My mom didn't help. Instead of calming Olivia down, she turned on me. How dare you upset your sister like this? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Look, I've been helping you a lot already. I'm paying for your college, your living expenses, buying your clothes. Oh, here we go, Mom interrupted, her face turning red. You're going to throw all that in her face now? That's what family does, Tracy. We help each other. You're just fulfilling your duties as a big sister. I stood up, my hands shaking. I'm leaving. This is ridiculous. Fine. Olivia screamed after me as I headed for the door. I'll ask Daddy for the money instead. And don't expect an invitation to the wedding since you're too selfish to help. I slammed the door behind me, but not before hearing my mom consoling Olivia. Don't worry, sweetie. Your sister has always been difficult. We'll figure something out. The next 2 weeks were blissfully quiet. No calls from Mom, no texts from Olivia, no guilt trips or manipulation attempts. I actually got to focus on my work and enjoy some peace for once. My phone rang one afternoon, and I was surprised to see my stepfather Robert's name on the screen. We hadn't talked in a while, though we'd always maintained a decent relationship after his divorce from my mom. Got a minute, he sounded tired. Sure, what's up? Your mother and Olivia came to see me, he said, and I could hear him sighing. They showed me this wedding budget. I couldn't help but laugh. Let me guess. They want you to pay for the extravaganza? He confirmed my suspicions. When he refused, Olivia apparently threw a tantrum, claiming she'd ask me instead. He was disappointed but clear, he wasn't going to encourage this entitled behavior. We talked for a while longer, sharing our frustrations about the situation. It felt good to know I wasn't the only one who thought this was completely insane. A week later, my mom and Olivia showed up at my apartment unannounced. They didn't mention their failed attempt to get money from my stepfather. Instead, they came armed with a new budget, still ridiculous, but slightly less astronomical. See, Olivia said, shoving the paper at me, we cut everything down. Now you can help. I looked at the numbers. They'd removed the doves and the famous band, but it was still way more than I could afford. I still can't pay for this, I told her. You could take out a loan, she suggested, like it was the most obvious solution in the world. My mom beamed, chiming in, the payments wouldn't be too bad if you spread them out over a few years. That was my breaking point. I stood up, walked to my front door, and held it open. Get out. Both of you. I'm not taking out a loan for your wedding. I'm not paying for any of it. End of discussion. Olivia gathered her things, her face twisted with anger. You selfish scum. I hope you die alone. My mom gave me one of her patented disappointed looks as they left. I really thought I raised you better than this, Tracy. I closed the door behind them and slid down to the floor, my head in my hands. Somehow, I knew this wasn't over with my family. It never is. Update 1, about a month after the confrontation at my apartment, everything changed. It was my Aunt Sandra's birthday, and despite my reservations, I knew I couldn't skip the family gathering. These events were always complicated, but this one would prove to be particularly intense. Aunt Sandra's house was a cozy place, filled with family photos that included several of my dad. I always loved looking at them, trying to piece together more memories of him. When I arrived, the tension was instant. My mom and Olivia were already there, huddled in a corner, whispering and shooting daggers at me with their eyes. I decided to ignore them and went straight to Aunt Sandra. Happy birthday, I said, hugging her tight. I was genuinely grateful for at least one normal family relationship. Tracy, sweetheart, she whispered, holding me close, I heard about everything. Are you okay? I just nodded and handed her my gift. The next hour was awkward but manageable. I caught up with cousins I hadn't seen in a while, carefully navigating the room to avoid my mom and Olivia. Everyone seemed to be walking on eggshells, clearly aware of the family drama but trying to maintain the celebration's cheerful facade. Then came the toasts. My stomach dropped when my mom stood up, glass in hand. She had that look, the one that meant trouble. I'd like to say something, she started, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Sandra, you're such a wonderful sister-in-law, always supporting family, unlike some people here. You understand the importance of helping your loved ones. The room got quiet. Too quiet. It breaks my heart to see how some children turn out, she continued, staring directly at me. When you raise them, sacrifice everything for them, and they grow up to be selfish and ungrateful. That was it. I'd had enough. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. Stop right there, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite my shaking hands. You want to talk about being ungrateful? Let's talk about how you've been living in my house. Yes, everyone, my house, the one my grandfather left to me, not you. Let's talk about how I've been paying for Olivia's college, her clothes, her expenses, while you guilt-trip me about not taking out a loan for her ridiculous wedding. The room was dead silent. Olivia started crying right on cue. How dare you? My mom's face was red with rage. I gave birth to you. I raised you. And this is how you repay me? Her voice was rising. You're nothing but a worthless, greedy. Enough. I shouted, surprising even myself. You want greedy? Fine. I'll show you greedy. Get out of my house. You have 2 weeks to move out. After that, I'm getting lawyers involved. My mom turned pale. You can't be serious. Oh, I am serious. The relatives were staring open-mouthed. Olivia was sobbing harder now, but for once, I didn't care. I turned to Aunt Sandra, who looked sad but understanding. I'm sorry about ruining your birthday, I said, hugging her. Goodbye. I'll call you later. As I walked out, I heard my mom screaming behind me. But I didn't look back. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my car key in the ignition. But once I did, I drove straight home and poured myself a very large glass of wine. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages and missed calls from my mom. I read the first few. Tracy, please. You can't do this to us. I didn't mean what I said. Where are we supposed to go? You're being ridiculous. I blocked her number. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. Over the next few days, every relative I had started calling me. Some were diplomatic. Others were downright hostile. My cousin Lauren's call was typical. Look, Tracy, I get that you're upset, but you can't throw your own mother out on the street. Watch me, I replied, then hung up. Aunt Linda tried a different approach. Sweetie, your mother's not perfect, but she's still your mother. Think about what your father would want. That one hurt. But I stood firm. Dad would want his daughter to stop being manipulated and used, I responded. And don't bring him into this. None of you bothered to tell me the truth about the house all these years. I was done. Completely and absolutely done. Update 2, I decided to get professional help. The lawyer I hired, Mr. Reynolds, was refreshingly straightforward. His office was a no-nonsense space filled with legal files and a sense of calm precision that immediately put me at ease. Here's the situation, he explained, spreading documents across his desk. You're the legal owner of the house. You've been paying all taxes and bills. Your mother could try to claim tenant rights due to long-term residency, but given that you've been maintaining the property and she's had free residence, any judge would likely side with you. What's my next step? I asked, my fingers nervously tracing the edge of his mahogany desk. We'll serve her with a formal eviction notice. 2 weeks is actually generous. You're well within your rights here. The process was more emotional than I expected. I had Mr. Reynolds draw up all the necessary paperwork, each document feeling like another step towards finally breaking free from my family's emotional stranglehold. When the 2 weeks were almost up, I went to the house with Mr. Reynolds, not wanting to face my mom alone. The scene we found was exactly what I expected: chaos, emotion, and desperation. My mom was crying. Olivia was yelling. Boxes were scattered everywhere. This is illegal, my mom screamed when she saw my lawyer. I'll sue you, Tracy. I'll take everything you have. Mr. Reynolds remained perfectly calm. Mrs. Johnson, you're welcome to pursue legal action. But I should warn you that you'd likely lose, and the court costs would be substantial. How can you do this to your own mother? Olivia demanded, getting in my face. Where are we supposed to live? That's not my problem anymore, I said, surprising myself with how little I felt. You have until tomorrow evening, Mr. Reynolds stated firmly. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property. My mom tried a different tactic, her voice suddenly soft and pleading. Tracy, honey, please. I'm sorry about what I said at the party. I was upset. I didn't mean it. But I'd heard it all before, the guilt trips, the manipulation, the fake apologies. I was done with all of it. Mr. Reynolds will oversee the final move out tomorrow, I said, turning to leave. I don't want to see either of you again. Later, I heard through Aunt Sandra that my mom and Olivia had moved in with Olivia's fiancé Jake. Apparently, the grand wedding plans were now on hold due to lack of funds. My mom was telling everyone who would listen about her cruel, heartless daughter, who threw her own family out on the street. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what she was saying about me. It had been 3 months since I evicted my mom and Olivia. The house sat empty now. I couldn't bring myself to sell it or rent it out yet. Sometimes I drove by, remembering the good times before everything went wrong. Before the manipulation became obvious. Before Olivia turned into an entitled princess. Before I realized how much of my life I'd spent trying to please people who saw me as nothing but a walking ATM. Last week, Aunt Sandra invited me over for coffee. She's been my rock through all of this, the only one who's consistently supported my decision. How are you really doing? She asked, setting down a plate of those chocolate cookies she knows I love. Honestly, better than I expected, I said, wrapping my hands around the warm coffee mug. But there was something I hadn't told anyone yet. I've been seeing a therapist, I admitted. Dr. Martinez. She's been helping me understand a lot about my relationship with Mom and Olivia. About how Mom's been manipulating me since Dad died, using grief and guilt to control me. Aunt Sandra reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your dad would be proud of you. He was the most honest, straightforward person I knew. He wouldn't have wanted you to be used and manipulated, even by family, especially by family. She got up and went to her bookshelf, pulling out an old photo album. I've been meaning to give you this. These are pictures of your dad from before you were born through your early years. We spent the next hour going through the album. There were photos I'd never seen before, Dad in college, Dad at his first job, Dad holding me as a baby. In every picture, he had the same kind, genuine smile. Your mother changed after he died, Aunt Sandra hesitated. I tried to stay close, to be there for you. But she made it difficult when she married your stepfather. We were all concerned, but she shut us out, said we were interfering. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from my cousin Lauren, FYI, Olivia's wedding is officially cancelled. Jake called it off. I showed the message to Aunt Sandra. Her eyebrow raised slightly. Do you feel bad? I considered for a moment. Honestly? I'm relieved. Jake's a good guy. He deserves better than getting sucked into this mess. Update 3, a week after my conversation with Aunt Sandra, I was working late at the office when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer. Tracy? The voice was exhausted, and I immediately recognized it as Jake, Olivia's ex-fiancé. Please don't hang up, he said quickly. I need to talk to you. If this was about the wedding, I was ready to end the call. But something in his tone stopped me. I called off the engagement, Jake began. And I'm sorry, but not for the reasons you might think. I leaned back in my chair, listening. Jake explained that after I'd evicted my mom and Olivia, they had moved in with him. At first, he felt bad for them. But slowly, he started noticing things, disturbing things that made him realize the depth of their manipulation. They never offered to contribute to bills, he said. Olivia wouldn't look for work, saying she was too stressed about the wedding. Your mom kept talking about how you'd come around eventually, how you'd feel guilty and give them money. The final straw came when Jake found them going through his personal papers. They were looking for information about his savings, his investments. They wanted to know exactly how much they could get him to spend on the wedding. When I confronted Olivia, Jake continued, you know what she said. She claimed I was being selfish, just like you. That if I really loved her, I'd want to give her the wedding of her dreams. That's when he knew the engagement was over. As Jake continued talking, I realized how deep the manipulation ran. He shared details about conversations with my mom, how she had been systematically working to isolate Olivia from any support system, creating a dependency that bordered on emotional abuse. Your mom would call me multiple times a day, Jake revealed. Always with some crisis, some reason why Olivia needed more support, more money, more everything. It was exhausting. I thought about my own experiences, how similar tactics had controlled me for years. The constant guilt, the emotional blackmail, the never-ending sense of obligation. A few days later, another text from my cousin Lauren confirmed the fallout. Mom and Olivia got kicked out of Jake's place. They're staying with Grandma now. Olivia's telling everyone Jake cheated on her, and Mom's saying you turned him against her. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and started looking at real estate listings. Maybe it was time to sell the house. Use the money to buy a place closer to work. Somewhere with no painful memories attached. My professional life was thriving. My freelance creative career had taken off in ways I never expected. Each project was a testament to my independence, my ability to create something meaningful without the constant drain of family manipulation. The next day, I met with my therapist, Dr. Martinez. Her office was a calm sanctuary, filled with soft lighting and plants that seemed to breathe tranquility. How are you feeling about everything? She asked. I laughed, a bit surprised at myself. You know what's weird? I feel guilty about not feeling guilty. Does that make sense? She smiled, that knowing smile that told me she'd heard similar stories before. Perfect sense. You've spent your whole life being programmed to feel responsible for your mother and sister's happiness. It's natural to feel strange when you finally break free of that programming. We delved deeper into my family dynamics. Dr. Martinez helped me understand the generational patterns of manipulation, how my mother's behavior was likely a learned response from her own upbringing. But understanding didn't mean accepting. Empathy doesn't mean allowing yourself to be a victim, she explained. You can understand someone's pain without sacrificing your own well-being. We talked about rebuilding. Not just my relationship with my family, but with myself. The years of emotional manipulation had created deep wounds, and healing wasn't a linear process. I keep waiting for the regret to hit, I admitted. For that voice in my head that says I'm a terrible daughter, a horrible sister. But it's not coming. All I feel is relief. Peace. Like I can finally breathe. Dr. Martinez nodded. That's because you've done nothing wrong. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. Refusing to be manipulated isn't selfish. You're not responsible for the consequences of their actions. As I left her office, my phone rang again. Another unknown number. It was Olivia. She was crying. Tracy, she sobbed, Jake left me. I have nowhere to go. 6 months ago, I would have caved. I would have offered money, help, support. I would have let myself be guilt-tracked back into the old patterns. Instead, I said something I never thought I'd be able to say. I'm sorry you're having a hard time, Olivia. I hope you figure things out. Then I hung up. Blocked the number. Walked to my car. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. They say blood is thicker than water. But I've learned that's not always a good thing. Sometimes, blood ties can drown you if you let them. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself, and for others, is to let go. I started my car and headed home. Not to the house where I grew up. Not to the past. But to my apartment. To my future. To a life where I finally put myself first. Reddit. I never expected so much support when I shared my story. To everyone who reached out, shared similar experiences, or offered kind words, thank you. You've shown me I'm not alone in setting boundaries with toxic family. My healing journey continues, and this community has been my unexpected lifeline. Stay strong, everyone.